Hello, General Hospital will reveal Marco arrived at Windmere like a whirlwind, unpredictable, charged with danger, and cloaked in the shadows of a past steeped in secrets and temptation. His presence wasn't a coincidence, nor was it a nostalgic return to rekindle a fleeting romance. Beneath the surface of his seductive charm lay a dark agenda, meticulously crafted and shrouded in manipulation. For Lucas, the encounter with Marco after their passionate one-night stand had left an indelible mark. The chemistry between them was electric, and it consumed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Despite the protests of Brad, his heartbroken ex who still clung to the hope of reconciliation, Lucas found himself drawn deeper into Marco's gravitational pull. Unable to resist the allure of his piercing eyes and disarming smile, Brad, watching helplessly from the sidelines, could do nothing but witness Lucas spiral into the arms of a man whose intentions were anything but sincere. He had tried everything: confrontation, emotional appeals, even reminding Lucas of their past love, but it was as if Lucas was caught in a trance, blinded by the fantasy Marco so artfully crafted. Every step closer Lucas took only tightened the snare, and Brad's efforts to pull him back fell into futility. What Lucas didn't know, what he couldn't begin to suspect, was that he was nothing more than a pawn in a game far more sinister than a mere love triangle. Marco hadn't come to Port Charles looking for love. He had come with a mission. And standing in the shadows behind him was Sidwell, his father, a man whose soul was as dark as the deals he made. Sidwell wasn't just a criminal hiding beneath the sheen of wealth and power, he was a master manipulator who saw people not as human beings, but as tools, assets, leverage. And Marco, his own son, was his most finely tuned instrument. From a young age, Marco had been molded to obey, to infiltrate, to destroy. Independence was an illusion he wore like a mask. But the strings that controlled him were ever present, always tightening when Sidwell demanded results. This time, Lucas was the target. Whether it was because of Lucas's ties to General Hospital, his access to confidential information, or an old secret he unknowingly carried, Sidwell wanted him compromised, and Marco was sent to do the job. To Marco, the seduction was second nature. Every flirtatious glance, every whispered promise, every carefully timed vulnerability was part of the plan. He knew exactly how to break through Lucas's defenses. How to become the fantasy Lucas didn't know he craved. But even as he played the role, there were cracks in the performance, moments where guilt flickered, where the weight of his father's control became unbearable. Yet he pushed forward. He had no choice. But the true danger was that Lucas wasn't the only one being drawn into Marco's web. Unbeknownst to anyone, Marco had already set his sights on another man, Chase. Unlike Lucas, Chase was grounded, morally unshakable, and fiercely loyal. But that didn't make him safe. In fact, it made him a greater challenge. Marco began his approach subtly, weaving himself into Chase's life with calculated precision. No one knew what he wanted from Chase. Was it access, influence, information, or something far more personal? The reason remained hidden, but one thing was certain: whatever Marco's game was, it was expanding. And soon, Chase would be caught in the same storm Lucas had no idea he was already drowning in. Lucas believed he was on the verge of something real, something exhilarating. What he didn't see was the trap closing in around him. He couldn't fathom that every tender word was rehearsed, every intimate moment a manipulation, every shared secret a strategy. He was falling in love with a man who didn't exist, a mask worn by someone who had been trained to lie. As for Brad, he stood on the outside looking in, the only one with eyes clear enough to sense the danger. But his voice was growing smaller, fading into the background noise of Lucas's infatuation. And Chase, still unaware he was becoming part of a much larger scheme, had no idea the darkness that was slowly beginning to shadow his world. Port Charles, for all its calm and routine, was sitting on the edge of something explosive. Marco's arrival was no mere subplot, it was the beginning of a calculated unraveling. Hearts would be broken, secrets exposed, and lives upended. And when the dust finally settles, no one will walk away unscathed. Meanwhile, in a more shadowed corner of Windmere, Natalia, an elegant and enigmatic woman who once shared a deeply complicated and possibly dangerous past with Sidwell, began to feel the cold fingers of old ghosts creeping into her present. The news that Marco was in town sent an undeniable chill down her spine. It wasn't mere coincidence, it was a sign that the past she had spent years trying to bury was slowly, and deliberately, clawing its way back into her life. Natalia had always been a master of poise and concealment. Her reputation in Port Charles was that of a woman who knew how to navigate power, how to maintain grace under pressure, and how to keep her secrets buried beneath layers of composure. But there were whispers, unconfirmed rumors and subtle hints over the years, that suggested Natalia was not just a former lover of Sidwell's, but also the biological mother of Marco. It was a possibility she never confirmed nor denied. To some, her silence was strategic, to others, it was an act of self-preservation. Only Natalia knew the truth. And she had guarded it with the same intensity she used to protect herself from the man she once tried to escape. Now, with Marco's presence looming over Windmere, that carefully maintained distance was crumbling. For years, Natalia had feared that the sins of her past, particularly the toxic and dangerous entanglement with Sidwell, would someday catch up to her. Marco's arrival wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a trigger that threatened to expose everything she had fought so hard to keep hidden. The possibility that he was her son made every encounter, every rumor, every glance a weight she could barely carry. What made it worse was the uncertainty. She didn't know why Marco was really in Port Charles. Was he here under his father's orders, sent to reel her back into Sidwell's poisonous grasp? Or was he here of his own volition, trying to break free from the chains of manipulation and violence that had defined his life? That question haunted her more than any other. If Marco had come to reclaim her, to remind her of who she once was, then she would have to make a choice, run again, or confront the darkness head-on. But if he had come seeking truth, searching for freedom, for clarity, even for a fractured sense of family, then Natalia might be forced to face the most terrifying possibility of all, redemption. Their eventual meeting, inevitable and charged with tension, would be more than just a reunion. It would be a reckoning between mother and son, whether or not those roles were ever formally acknowledged. Decades of secrets, guilt, resentment, and love left unspoken would rise to the surface. Would Marco confront her with anger for abandoning him to Sidwell's control? Would Natalia finally confess the truth she buried in silence? Or would their interaction remain veiled in ambiguity, a continuation of the games that Sidwell himself taught so well? And more importantly, where did Marco's loyalties truly lie? Was he still under Sidwell's thumb, enacting a carefully orchestrated plan to draw Natalia back into submission? Or was he turning against the man who had shaped him into a weapon, seeking a sliver of humanity from the one woman who might have loved him before everything turned dark? As Windmere filled with secrets and the tension between past and present grew unbearable, Natalia stood at the precipice of a truth she could no longer outrun. The reappearance of Marco wasn't just a threat to her stability, it was a mirror held up to the life she abandoned. The son she may have forsaken, and the man she once feared more than death itself. Whatever came next would not be clean, nor easy. It would be a storm of emotion, manipulation, and revelation, and Natalia, for the first time in years, would be forced to face the very thing she thought she had buried forever. Amid all the chaos quietly brewing beneath the surface of Windmere and the broader shadows cast across Port Charles, Lucas stood unknowingly at the eye of the storm, calm, hopeful, and tragically unaware. He had convinced himself that Marco's reappearance in his life was more than a coincidence, more than a passing flame from a passionate night. To Lucas, it felt like fate, a second chance at something thrilling, intimate, and transformative. For someone who had endured heartbreak, who had struggled to find emotional footing after past relationships crumbled. Marco's sudden presence felt like the opening of a new chapter. A clean slate. A chance to feel again. But Lucas, for all his sincerity, was walking blindly into a trap. The love he thought he was rediscovering wasn't rooted in genuine affection. It wasn't born from connection or mutual vulnerability. It was a carefully designed illusion, woven expertly by a man who had been trained to seduce, manipulate, and infiltrate. And behind that illusion lurked the shadow of Sidwell, whose hand quietly tightened around each move Marco made. Every interaction Lucas believed to be real, every laugh, every late-night conversation. Every kiss that seemed charged with possibility, was part of a script designed for a purpose far more sinister than romance. Lucas's heart, so open and eager for love, had become the perfect target. His belief in the goodness of others, his desire to see the best in Marco, and his refusal to acknowledge the warning signs made him dangerously vulnerable. He didn't see the cracks in Marco's mask. The subtle moments of calculation, the glimmers of detachment behind eyes that otherwise looked full of fire. To Lucas, it was love. To Marco, it was a mission. And as those two realities moved forward on a collision course, Lucas was inching closer to devastation. Meanwhile, Brad watched from the periphery, consumed by a mix of jealousy, sorrow, and dread. His love for Lucas hadn't faded, no matter how deeply their past had scarred them both. He saw what Lucas refused to see: Marco's charm wasn't sincere. And the timing of his return was far too convenient. Brad sensed the danger almost instinctively, not just as an ex-lover, but as someone who knew how easily people could be manipulated when they wanted to believe in love. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, deeply wrong. But despite his warnings, his pleas, and even his bitterness, Lucas remained captivated by Marco's spell. Brad, wounded but resolute, found himself in an impossible position. He could try to protect Lucas, risk driving him away further, or step back and watch the man he loved walk headfirst into something that could shatter him. The frustration of knowing the truth, and being powerless to stop it, gnawed at him, fueling a quiet desperation. He began to wonder whether his own heartbreak might be the key to saving Lucas, or if this time, love would simply not be enough. And then there was Chase, unaware, unprepared, and unknowingly drifting into the same tangled web. While his connection with Marco was more recent and not as emotionally charged, the danger surrounding him was just as real. Marco had begun moving into his orbit with calculated grace, exploiting cracks in Chase's personal life that even he hadn't acknowledged. Chase didn't yet realize that he was being watched, studied, and slowly drawn into a puzzle where he didn't even know he was a piece. But the pieces were aligning, and soon, he would be forced to choose a side, without even understanding the stakes. The tragedy of it all was in the silence, the unseen manipulations, the feelings being twisted into weapons, the way love was being redefined into a tool for destruction. Lucas believed he was falling into something beautiful. In reality, he was being pulled into a carefully orchestrated descent. Brad, left to pick up the pieces or intervene too late, could only hope his instincts would be enough to make a difference. And Chase, still standing on solid ground, had no idea the earth beneath him had already begun to shift. What no one fully grasped was that Marco wasn't just a threat. He was the harbinger of a larger reckoning, one that would shake relationships, unearth secrets, and demand consequences. And at the very center of it all was Lucas, hopeful, blinded, and walking toward a love story that might just be the beginning of his unraveling. Port Charles is standing on the precipice of disaster, quietly trembling beneath the weight of secrets too heavy to stay hidden much longer. On the surface, life appears to carry on as usual, smiles exchanged at Kelly's, polite nods in the hospital corridors, whispers over martinis at the Metro Court, but beneath that polished exterior lies a growing storm, swelling with betrayal, deception, and emotional landmines waiting to explode. The intricate web that has been spun, thread by thread, by manipulative forces like Sidwell, the false allure of Marco, and the emotional vulnerabilities of those drawn into their orbit, is nearing its breaking point. The lies, the half-truths, the omissions that once protected reputations and preserved relationships are beginning to unravel. And when they do, they won't simply tear at the seams, they will rip through the very foundations that have held families, lovers, and friendships together. Lucas, clinging to the illusion of newfound love, will soon come face to face with the cruel realization that he has been manipulated, not cherished. His heart, so willing to believe in second chances, will be thrust into a nightmare of betrayal. Marco, the man he saw as a path to emotional healing, will be exposed not as a romantic salvation but as a weapon deployed by a father cloaked in darkness. The heartbreak that awaits Lucas will not be a simple wound, it will be a collapse of trust, a loss of innocence, a realization that love, when used by the wrong hands, can destroy just as swiftly as it can uplift. For Brad, the fallout will be no less devastating. He has tried to warn Lucas, to protect him from the danger he saw coming like headlights in the dark. But being ignored, dismissed, pushed aside in favor of a beautifully packaged lie will leave him grappling with more than just jealousy. He will be forced to question his own worth, his instincts, and whether love is truly worth fighting for if no one believes in your fight. And then there's Chase, steady, reliable Chase, who doesn't yet understand how deep he's been pulled into this game. His role may still be unclear, his connection to Marco only beginning to form, but the consequences of being part of Sidwell's agenda will crash down on him nonetheless. Whether by emotional manipulation, blackmail, or simply collateral damage, Chase will find himself caught in the crossfire. And when he does, the righteous man known for justice and order will be faced with chaos and moral ambiguity unlike anything he's ever encountered. The ripple effect won't stop with them. Natalia, still standing on the edge of her past and uncertain of her future, will be forced to confront the truth about Marco, about her own silence, her decisions, her regrets. Sidwell, though hidden in the shadows, will tighten his grip, pulling strings and watching as the chaos he orchestrated begins to consume the very people he used to build it. Friendships will falter under the weight of suspicion. Families will fracture under the burden of revelations too painful to process. Allies will turn into enemies. Secrets, once whispered in dark rooms, will become the epicenter of public scandal. And as the lines between truth and lies, love and manipulation, loyalty and betrayal blur beyond recognition, Port Charles will no longer be a place of stability, it will become a battleground. When the truth is finally exposed, it will not come gently. It will strike like lightning, swift and merciless, illuminating everything that has been hiding in the dark. And in its wake, there will be no going back. Those who survive the fallout will be changed forever, marked by the pain, the choices, and the consequences of everything left unsaid for far too long. Port Charles is not just waiting to explode, it is already shaking, quietly, relentlessly, beneath the surface. The reckoning isn't coming. It's already begun. Stay tuned to General Hospital to uncover what Marco will do next, because the stakes have never been higher, and the danger is far from over. His presence in Port Charles is no accident, it's part of a deeply layered plan that is only beginning to unfold. Every move he makes is calculated, every connection he forms serves a purpose. And yet, there are signs that even Marco might be struggling to keep his footing as the lines between duty and emotion begin to blur. What began as a simple mission, seduce, infiltrate, extract, may be slipping from his control. Marco has embedded himself into Lucas's life with ease, drawing him in with charm, mystery, and a carefully curated vulnerability. But Lucas, despite being the initial target, has also become a complication. Has Marco developed real feelings? Or is he simply perfecting the role he was forced to play? And if it is all an act, how long can he keep the mask from cracking? At the same time, the mysterious interest Marco is showing in Chase raises even more questions. His approach is more subtle, more cautious, but no less intentional. Is Chase simply another pawn, or does he represent something more dangerous to Sidwell's master plan, something that must be neutralized or manipulated? The connection is still unfolding, but viewers can be certain of one thing: nothing Marco does is without motive, and nothing he touches remains untouched by chaos. Behind the scenes, Sidwell is still pulling the strings, a puppet master hiding in the shadows. But even he may not have full control over the storm he has unleashed. Natalia, potentially Marco's mother, is poised to confront a past she's long buried, and if she chooses to reveal the truth, it could unravel everything Sidwell has built. Will Marco turn against his father if he discovers the full truth about his origins? Or will he double down, becoming even more ruthless in his quest for approval or revenge? And what about Brad? Torn between jealousy, fear, and a deep unresolved love for Lucas, he may become the unlikely key to stopping Marco, if he can act in time. His suspicions are growing. His instincts are sharp. But his heart may cloud his judgment when it matters most. The pieces are in motion. The lies are mounting. And the consequences are creeping closer with each passing episode. Will Marco's next move bring him closer to destruction, or deeper into the twisted game he's playing? Will he be exposed, redeemed, or destroyed? Don't miss a single moment of the drama. Tune in to General Hospital to find out what Marco will do next, because the truth is coming, and when it hits, it won't just shake Port Charles, it will tear it apart.